This episode was brought to you by Slate Black Industries. For M-LOK grips and accessories, visit slateBlackIndustries.com.
One pack, green, over. At the top, 16, roger, over.
16, 15 like 2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, red count 1, over.
Welcome to Pick 1, a mental exercise brought to you by 9-Hole Reviews. In each Pick 1 episode, we deliberately ask you to choose between two options with opposing weapon systems and give you a scenario to mentally put yourself into. We publish this scenario and options on all of our social media pages about a week before our live discussion segment for members and audience to comment and, most importantly, to vote on the poll. During our live Pick 1 segment, we will discuss the scenario in our 4-part live discussion. Part 1, a review of the scenario and options. Part 2, we discuss our choices and why. Part 3, we discuss comments that stood out to us. And finally, Part 4, we open the forum to any viewer that's present to join us in the live chat. Now, to start this week's Pick 1 exercise, this is a recap from our previously published scenario brief. So, 2007, Baghdad, Iraq. You are a CIA Special Operations Group officer working on an overall human intelligence mission when all of a sudden JSOC, or the Joint Special Operations Command, reaches out for help to canvass the city of Baghdad for a sniper named Juba. Now, JSOC intel suspects that he's operating in the west of the Green Zone, trying to pick off targets between the Baghdad International Airport, or BIA, and the US Embassy. Now, due to time constraints and needing to cover a large amount of rooftops, JSOC's sniper elements are stretched thin, and some of them are actually split onto separate rooftops to, 1, identify the targets, and 2, provide overwatch for US forces on the ground doing the searching. Some JSOC shooters are forced to work solo, and so you expect a high possibility to be on your own for the next 72-hour plus operations. Your options for the Pick 1. This is actually one of them. The Accuracy International with a suppressor and an MP5. Option number 2, a SCAR 17 with an LPVO. You tell us in the comments and make your choice wisely on the polls. And we'll talk about it. This week, for our discussion, our special guest is U.S. Army Special Forces Major Weston Amaya. Weston deployed in Iraq as a young infantry platoon leader in 2008 and later on returned as a Special Forces officer and team leader in Baghdad, in some of the very locations that we will talk about today. You can actually see him hanging out on a rooftop near the US Embassy in Baghdad in this photo.
Право. Есть загорание двух крайних диодов центральных нейтраль погасли. Рут влево. Есть загорание двух крайних диодов.
And here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first episode of Pick 1. It's actually the first live episode that Josh and I are hosting on 9-Hole Reviews, so quite excited. And we've got our special guest, Weston. Thank you for joining us, Weston.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And thanks to all of the numerous subscribers who've tuned in to watch. We sincerely appreciate you guys making this worthwhile and possible. And we hope that you're going to enjoy the next 50 to an hour.
Yes, or 5 years. Okay, so let's start off with the first part of any Pick 1 debrief that we're talking about, essentially. This is mission debrief, or the scenario review. Something actually interesting, as I was talking to Weston about Pick 1, that just came to our minds, regardless of how long we've left the military, is our military acronyms. METTC. Weston, I don't know if you probably still remember ROTC, of being drilled METTC. There's a saying, METTC dependent in the military, METTC everything, METTC this and that. METTC means what? Mission, enemy forces, time considerations, terrain, troops required or troops on hand. And then C is civilian considerations. It used to be Met T, and then we added the C towards my time frame in. So as we're looking at the scenario review, I tend to peel things back with a Met TC mentality. The mission, counter sniper. We're looking for a specific guy in Baghdad between BIA and the embassy. So how long is that road, Weston?
It's about 11 kilometers, give or take, from gate to gate, from green zone to BIOP.
Yeah, BIOP is Baghdad International for us in the operational sphere. So for that 11 kilometers, we're looking for one particular gentleman, and we are hoping to help him rendezvous with destiny, right? Enemy consideration, it's that one person. However, we're not just talking about one guy in Baghdad. We've also got insurgents littered everywhere in 2007 Baghdad. And again, this is as the surge is building up here for us in U.S. military talk. And then our time is potentially the 72 hours we will be laying there in whatever hide that we find. Terrain. This is something I want to talk to Weston about, since Weston was there in during that time frame and then afterwards as well. What is the terrain like? And I'll pull up some pictures that Weston had sent me earlier.
Yeah, sure. So along that route, the terrain actually varies from pretty densely populated urban areas to some open areas, whether it's open dirt, open grass, stuff like that. So what you're looking at, depending on the elevation of the hide site that you select, is probably an engagement anywhere from 200 meters out to 1,000 meters plus. Yeah, so as you can see from these photos, these photos are actually in the green zone in Baghdad, and so depending on, this is a really high building, and the vantage was 2 kilometers plus in some areas or more. You're likely not to get that from an individual hide site along this route. So I think probably a kilometer, maybe to 1.5 kilometers would be your max engagement range.
Sorry. So the troops consideration, the last piece of it, or not civilian consideration also. So the troops that we have on hand, we're talking about the ground JSOC operators that are on ground combing. Potentially there's also JSOC attachments that are on ground on mobile. We're talking about other shooters in the rooftop. Unknown as far as air coverage and gunships. We just don't know as far as that goes. And then the last bit, civilian considerations. What's a civilian consideration like in that area, Weston? Yeah,
so I mean, this is definitely a trafficked route by both civilian, military, NGO, anything that you can think of is on this route, and being able to distinguish between what is a threat and what is not a threat is going to be pretty key anytime you're in an urban zone like this. So the civilian consideration is super high, especially in 2007 when we're really on the peak of the surge in Iraq, where we're trying to minimize civilian casualties while still getting after the enemy combatants in the area. So civilian casualties are a top tier concern for U.S. forces and coalition forces in Iraq in 2007.
Okay, at that note, gentlemen, I just wanted to run through the METTC. Did you guys have any thoughts as far as our first part of the scenario review that you wanted to add to the mix?
No, I think you guys covered it. I mean, Weston's firsthand experience paints a pretty specific picture for us for what is respectfully a very wide ranging environment of potential factors. I mean, you could be anywhere from, you said, as close as potentially 300 or closer meters from a max vantage all the way up to over a kilometer, right? So, I mean, that's a significant environmental shift. And we're talking about, closed in, close confined urban areas all the way to just open fields across this area. So we've got a very diverse environment that we could find ourselves in.
Yep, and I think a lot of that is going to point back to which weapon system you select, coupled with which hide site you select. So one's going to play off of the other, and whether it's the weapon system you select drives the hide site selection, or vice versa. I think you could make either work in that scenario.
Right. So the last bit of our scenario brief, of course, has to come back to the pick one options that we're looking at, right? So we're looking at the Accuracy International suppressed, and that is a key factor to this, with an MP5. Distance, precision, and close quarters capability is on the advantage of this. However, it is glaring that the weight and maneuverability is going to be an issue with this. The other option is the SCAR 17 with an LPVO that goes up to 8 power. So, gentlemen, if there's nothing more to add, we can move to phase 2, which is the our picks. All right.
Да, принято. Контролируем автоматическое сближение. Да. Метров. Предельная скорость сближения. 1.2 на сближение.
All right, so we are back, phase 2, or part 2, on our picks. We're on a level right here. It's me, and then right underneath me, we've got Josh. Poking at Josh, and then underneath Josh, we've got Weston. So I can go first, and then we go down to Josh.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so my pick is, as if this is a surprise to anyone, I would pick the Accuracy International suppressed with the MP5. Now, we ran this somewhat earlier when we were kind of testing the waters with comments in the YouTube and Facebook sphere, and we had it was more skewed before towards the SCAR because of one major factor, in my opinion, which is the suppressor. Being potentially solo, I want to conceal. I want to hide. The other part to this is if I'm on a 72-hour op to observe, for me, it's easier to run a long-term observation mission through a heavy and steady rifle. And I would take that over the maneuverability of getting to the site, because you could throw, I mean, Josh, you and I love using our drag mats that we've got. I would rather put mine inside of a drag mat and ruck it as a, on my back. However, and then move with an MP5. However, the downside of that is going to come down to during that maneuver time, right? During your infill. I mean, if you get caught up anywhere, you've got a giant heavy stick that is taking up a lot more ruck space for sustenance or anything, ammunition that you want to bring along. However, I think for me, I would take the concealability. I would take the long-term comfort, if you could say, the easier PID of the AI with an MP5 just on the side of me, on the right side behind me a little bit, so where you could just turn over. So that's my pick. Let me. I forgot to put this out, but that's my pick right here. So the next one, we go downwards. It's Josh, your turn.
All right, so I'm going to contrast Henry a little bit here. Now I'm going to go with option 2, which is the SCAR and the LPVO. I think a lot of this, and you alluded to this a little bit, Henry, at the onset here, is where you said it's no surprise to anybody, but it comes down to familiarity in many respects for me. And that being that over the last 10 or so years, pretty much all of my training, my competition, any of the real shooting that I've done is on a gas gun with an LPVO. So, and specifically ARs, but obviously the SCAR's ergonomics mirror that of the AR in many respects. And so there is a built-in level of confidence with that particular platform that I just don't have with a bolt gun. And so I think that probably influences and drives my decision quite a bit. But there are some other points I want to take us through here. You also mentioned the weight, Henry. And for me, maneuvering around potentially between one or more positions, I feel like the weight differential there, especially if I'm inserting into this position on foot, the lighter weight provided by the SCAR setup, and not just a little bit lighter, but dramatically lighter. I think that AI setup is well over 20 pounds alone. And when we add in the MP5 and all of the additional kit, ammo, mags, etc., differentiating the ammo for the MP5, that definitely plays a factor. And by opening up the weight conversation, I may have the ability to carry with me other valuable tools that I might have to leave behind from a weight constraint perspective if my actual fighting package, the weapon itself, is lighter. So I'm thinking about things like a superior optical device, i.e. a spotting scope of some kind, that's going to give me dramatically better PID capabilities, as well as things like claymores or other explosive devices that I might be able to utilize to secure my position since I'm going to be operating alone. Again, appreciate you might be able to take those with the AI kit as well. But again, when we're talking about the weight constraints here, things start to add up, and then we have to make some compromises somewhere down the line. Additionally, and this is one that I think we saw a lot of in comments, is that the firepower dynamic of the SCAR, how impressive the firepower would be over that of a bolt gun, is a relevant feature. Now, that may be a bit of a Hollywood thought approach of, we're in an observing position, doing primarily PID and observation. The odds of us having to take an engagement, we're going to be expending multiple rounds rapidly, is probably pretty minimal, especially based on the environment we're in Baghdad in 2007, as Weston is going to probably allude to in his point of conversation, about how the combatants would have worked, the enemy combatants at that time. I will let him cover that more specifically. But with all that said, the thing that constantly comes to mind for me is the video of Grantham's dad engaged in the Battle of Najaf, where, using a gas gun, engaging multiple hostiles that kind of appeared supposedly on, they weren't necessarily ready for that type of an engagement because their role was not necessarily that type of an engagement. And so that comes to mind. And in that particular scenario, obviously the firepower would be very nice. So again, maybe a bit of a trope to talk about that, and kind of like a catch-22 that you might get pulled into, or rather just like a trap that you might fall into, because that's what we think about when we think about this particular dichotomy, but still worth mentioning nonetheless. Last thing I want to bring up here, and this is really, really relevant. It would be a lot easier, as you alluded to, for me to select this setup if it were also suppressed. But I think the lack of a suppressor, we have the Surefire Warden on it, and that's fine. But the lack of a suppressor in an environment where I'm working alone just seems really scary. Like, I wouldn't want to utilize the firepower advantages of the gas gun in that scenario where I'm shooting multiple times from a singular position unsuppressed. As if there are any bad guys in the area, they're going to know where someone's shooting from. And as a lone dude, that kind of scares me. So of all of the reasons that we've talked about so far, I think that the lack of a suppressor on the SCAR setup is probably like the number one reason that I wouldn't select it if I were to go with the AI solution. But that's just me. So how about we pass things over to the expert?
Yep. Thank you, Josh. Would not consider myself an expert in this field specifically. I'm not sniper qualified. No, my opinions are just my own. They're not doctrine or anything like that. But do have experience with sniper employment and the things like that, and long range and stuff like that. So just to kind of piggyback on what you ended with, the suppression piece, definitely important. So when you look at mission analysis here, operating in a small team or potentially as a singleton, your number one threat is the compromise of your location. The ability of enemy forces in the area to generate even a small unit of, say, 4 to 5 enemy combatants and close on your location is the number one threat to yourself during this mission. Because you're in a hide site, you're already, by nature of what you're doing, you're in a fixed location. So you're fixed, the enemy's maneuvering on you. You're at a disadvantage, and they have you outnumbered immediately. So I think your point about the suppression is a very valid one. That being said, a lot of the sniper platforms in this time started using suppressors, not only for to kind of not give away their position so discreetly, but also you have to consider overpressuring a small hide site or a small room that you may be in. So the suppressor is key. But for me, my pick would be the AI in this scenario, primarily because when I look at this from a mission analysis perspective, we're running counter sniper against a sniper who assumedly is pretty well trained, or he knows what he's doing, because it's 2007 and there's been war going on. He's been in combat for years and survived, which means that he probably knows what he's doing. So the idea that he's going to be sitting out in the open or on a rooftop taking shots at friendly forces going by is probably false. So and I think Henry mentioned this earlier, but Juba was actually known for taking shots from vehicles. So not only do you have to PID a single individual, not just the hostile act or hostile intent of an enemy combatant, you are looking for a specific person, which means you want to maximize all the magnification that you can get. And then also you're going to be engaging this individual from a sniper position, which in this case would more than likely be a car window out to several hundred yards. So it can be done with the SCAR, most definitely. But for me, I think you have a much higher success rate with the Accuracy International. So for that reason, I'd pick the AI. You do definitely give up some close quarter ability to defend yourself. But I think in reality, operating in a small team like that, you're going to want to shoot and displace, call for QRF, or continue to exfil out of the situation. The idea that you could stand and fight even against a 4 or 5 man element is possible, but it has a low success rate, even if you're fighting untrained insurgents, because you are fixed and they are able to maneuver on you. It's not ideal. So that's kind of my thinking behind it.
Okay, so we've got AI, SCAR, AI. Honestly, we'll see in the next portion how the voting turned out, and the voting typically is a good indication on how well balanced the two options are. So shall we
Henry,
move on to part 3?
I've just been following along with some of the comments, and a couple of the comments are referencing the commentary about suppression. It's relevant in this case to note that the SCAR in our scenario is not suppressed. Blast preventing device, yes, suppressor, no. So that's where we're drawing some of the dichotomy here and the breakdown. Additionally, and just a point that, I know we had discussed this as we were evaluating our own picks for the show. One of the things that you mentioned, or that I brought up, obviously, was the point about maneuverability and lacking maneuverability during, when you're running a big, heavy bolt gun, giving up some of that maneuverability. But I know there were some specific points that you wanted to touch on respective to that. And if you had to give up a position, how you might do it fast despite having a big, heavy kit.
Yes, and I picked one of the comments specifically.
Oh, perfect. Well, then off you go.
Tag on to that, which is the next portion that we're running into. And 3.
Выдаю УППС исходная. УППС исходная. Есть загорание двух диодов нейтральных. Отпустил погасли и выдаю ВПС исходная. Есть загорание двух крайних.
Welcome to Section 3. So, Section 3, we start pulling up comments that our viewers had left for us. And let's see. So, this one is actually interesting because in the past, Weston and I spoke of an op that I really wanted to really touch upon. Weston, like, you were talking about back when you were in Iraq. I believe the first time you were in Iraq that those guys in the 82nd, they had a couple snipers that got surrounded.
Yeah. So this was an interesting comment, and it kind of alludes to what I was getting at earlier when you're operating a small kill team or an SKT. So this was 2 rotations before I got there in Samara. The 82nd was operating a small kill team in the city. There were I think 2 DSCs awarded after this operation. Feel free to Google it. The 82nd in Samara. Really bad situation. So I think they were operating in a 4 or 5 man small kill team. Their position got compromised, and of course, just like I was saying, they tried to displace. They were able to displace after they were engaged, but their displacement was also compromised, and the enemy kept maneuvering on them and kept trying to run into the building, run up the stairs into the 2nd floor where they were located, and they were fixed, engaged in heavy fire, and actually several of them ended up going black on ammunition. They were throwing hand grenades down the stairwell and also picking up AKs as enemy combatants were running up the stairs. And it wasn't an uncommon thing for small kill teams to get compromised and run out of their original hide site locations. What ended up happening, I think it ended up being about 15-minute response time for the QRF who got in there and was able to bail them out of the situation. But I do believe they definitely took casualties. And you're talking about a 4 or 5 man element armed with both, AR style rifles, M4s, heavy weapons, grenades, everything, probably claymores, everything that you can think of. And they were still basically getting run out of house to house to house. And so just consider that when on this mission set, when you're operating potentially as a singleton, your ability to stand and fight is really almost non-existent, no matter how good of a shooter you are.
All right. So yeah, that's definitely the I think that when you sent me that, I mean, it was such a dramatic mission on the debrief, the article that you sent. We could post it in the comments after this, and guys could read about it. But it's very grim. So the next comment that I wanted to look at, that Josh actually alluded to before. Mark 1 suppressed with the MP5 as long as I have some thermite grenades as well. I'm good. Why thermites, you might ask? So,
because Call of Duty.
Indeed. So I think this is something, destroying kit to deny enemy access to your equipment is something that on the civilian side you don't think of very often because you have to buy it. So it's kind of, you get a little bit emotionally attached to things that you have to buy, right? But a lot of times, destroying stuff is just, it's a part of it, that what you would want to do. That's why you have thermite grenades. So this comment actually is, I hate using this term, but based, because what you could do if it really comes to it, boop, and then bug out with an MP5, you're instantly lighter on your load. You're more maneuverable than the SCAR. And that was one of the considerations for me. I mean, even if you, I guess, shoot your own equipment with the MP5 and get out, you're still denying enemy access to your equipment. But this comment stood out to me because, I mean, nobody even liked or thumbed up this comment. It was interesting because to me, that's exactly what I was thinking. And I don't think a lot of people were really talking about that, dropping equipment. So next one. Tough Choices 2007, hadn't seen many SCARs yet, which we kind of shoehorned.
Yeah, we're fudging some dates around. Okay, just go with us on this. Okay,
it's a yes, that's true, but just enjoy the pick one episode, right? Saw them 09, 010, Mark 14 at a time, which is, that would not, like, if it were Mark 14 versus AI, I think that would be even more of a tip towards the AI for me. Prefer Mark 12. I think the Mark 12, on the other hand, would be a tip towards a single rifle in this scenario. I mean, pretty much that's what we had discussed earlier.
Well, and just one other point that was raised on this is, if the SCAR had a higher power optic, this user says that they would lean toward it as opposed to an LPVO. And I think it's worth pointing out that the optic in your pick one on the AI is only a 10 power optic.
That's true, and Josh busts my balls for that. I'm used to using 10 power. That's just me. This also has something to go with the SCAR. If you have less weight, less stuff to carry, then you would shoulder observation equipment, which would be hands down the best observation item compared to anything else. Let's see. So the next one. Why is everyone jumping on the SCAR bandwagon? You're not a door kicker. You're a sniper there to observe and identify targets. Okay. This is talking about the distance that you could shoot as far as when it comes to the SCAR versus the AI, right? And to the other point, I deliberately didn't talk about the magnification, because standard you're issuing closer to like 12 or 15. I'm not going to go out and buy a 15 by to slap on just for one video. Stop it.
Well, let's talk through the commentary on the accuracy then. I mean, I've seen it in the comment section here as well.
Yeah.
Like, the AI is an exceptionally accurate bolt gun. It's accurate even in the world of bolt guns itself, right? I mean, it's a phenomenally accurate rifle. But the SCAR itself is also one of the most accurate battle rifles that we have tested on the show. I've seen a lot of comments to the contrary to that, but you printed a just over 1 MOA group with 9 shots with a 6 power optic. I mean, that in and of itself tells us what we need to know. We also shot it with an 8 power Trichicon, I believe it was, for the practical accuracy run, and cleared out to 800 without much issue. In fact, I think the further distances you were really smoking it. You kind of like settled in, and you knew what you needed to do with it. So from that perspective, I think it's worthwhile us talking through the inherent accuracy or inaccuracies of the system, and if that plays into our decision-making process at all. Obviously, Weston already referred to wanting every small incremental bit of advantage based on the likely scenario being a very small target.
Yeah, honestly, in my choice, it wasn't about which one was more accurate than. Well, okay, yes, it was. I would, of course, prefer the accuracy of the Accuracy International. However, more so weighed upon having an accurate suppressible system was what appealed to me. What that means is I do think the SCAR is capable of 800-meter engagements. I mean, we showed it on our practical accuracy episode. It was not difficult. However, the SCAR was one of those rifles that took frequent trips to the range because turns out it would shake itself loose when you fired it. I mean, red Loctite on the handguard and everything on the barrel nut, and it shook itself loose. And so it's one of those systems. I mean, you have to have the time and consideration to really take care. You can't just schlep it around,
Right.
and just go about your day and expect it to work like a G3 or a FAL in Central Africa. It's not the same system, but it is more accurate. There's also a consideration on what type of optic and mounts you would want to use on a SCAR, because it's known to be an optic, not just killer, but let's just it just straight murders optics. The U.S. optic that we had was shaken loose internally when the mount came loose when we were shooting it. So on the long-term usability as a SCAR goes, it's just something to keep in mind, that you really have to make sure that you're keeping every nut and bolt in the right torque and everything, in my opinion.
I mean, Weston, do you want to chime in on that particular component? I know you obviously were in the SCAR Classic review discussing its implementation with your teams, but walk us through. Is that something that you saw as a frequent or semi-frequent thing? Because obviously there's a very famous video nowadays where there are some Navy SEALs on YouTube who a couple of them talk about how they hated the SCAR, and that now has become like doctrinal in internet community about how that's just how it is. All special operations guys hate SCARs. So I mean, maybe just talk us through a little bit of that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. To be honest, I can't comment on what really the current, I guess, flavor of the month is when you're talking about the SCAR. What I can do is talk more historically about when they first rolled it out into the SOCOM community, and then after the rollout. So I think the SCAR does get a lot of bad press especially from special operations community. Some of it is earned, some of it is more hearsay. The SCAR definitely does have real world application for missions. It's more specific when you would want to employ it. And there are now other options other than the SCAR that provide the same type of ballistic effects and engagement criteria and stuff like that. So as far as where it's at now, not really sure. I think initially in SOCOM, people were opposed to it. Then it garnered some respect after it had been employed a few times. And now I think largely the community has moved away from it, but probably only some of that is performance based. A lot of it is there's other options out there on that platform.
Got it.
I think one of the biggest things, I mean, moving from the SOCOM community into regular Army, the M110 has been kind of a pretty big hit. I mean, it was bad. It was long. So then the CSAS came out, which is an HK 517. So piston driven AR-10 system.
Right.
And that's really become more of the trend in moving forward. And the FN SCAR has sort of been that passé at this point. But in the 2010s, I mean, that was kind of like that heat, that next hot item that was coming on. Is this going to be the big thing? SOCOM got a good few of them. I think it's like in the past, Weston, I think we've talked about how the acceptance took a while, and then people were really into it. And like you said, then other things just caught on very quickly. And I think the other things that caught on very quickly were things that could interchange the manual of arms easily with the AR system.
Yes, definitely true. Definitely true. And I mean, it did have some design difficulties early on. Was part of the problem, as y'all have noted in your videos past. But as the optics evolved, especially with the introduction of the LCAN and a lot of vibration resistant optics, it overcame a lot of the initial issues.
Okay, shall we go to the next?
Yeah, onward.
Yes, this is exactly what we're doing for pick one. For this particular one, it's 2 firearms, but typically it's 1 and 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This one's an interesting one. I'll pull it out a little bit. So this gentleman seems to have operational experience in Iraq. And he says, let's see, he was EOD, and he was in Iraq, Ramadi, Fallujah during the time frame. And he worked with the Marines, which their snipers carried the M40. They liked carrying the Mark 12 back in the day, but no longer. Let's see, what was that? The general gist of this guy, he's talking about his preference towards the AI and the MP5 because it's an observation mission to PID the target. Which one of the big things that I brought this out is because he seems to be talking a lot about his on ground experience.
Well, and it echoes Weston's comments, specifically our PID and usage.
So I think on this aspect, some guys are really honing on the mission requirements as the primary, which you should, as the primary objective.
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge, just like what I said in my my actual selection, is that we have to acknowledge that the idea that you're in this general role, you're likely to, as a single person, sit down and engage repeated shots out of your hide in succession against a multiple person force is probably more Hollywood driven than it is based in reality, based on the experience of what you guys have shared as well.
Well, to counterpoint that too, though, because this is 72-hour op, there's ground forces and other JSOC elements in the AO. The probability that the mission could change midstream, 24 hours in, 48 hours in, could also be high. So I think it's a valid consideration to consider a platform that's going to give you more versatility also.
So you're thinking, Weston, that like the fact that you have units operating in the area may draw out additional combatants or turn the op hotter than you might otherwise anticipate.
That could be a part of it. The other part of it could also be, let's say, the scenario where you're able to PID Juba. You call the ground forces, they core down the area, and now as the tier 1 elements, you would be the ones tasked to go in and kill capture Juba within that target area. So in that case, I think it'd be realistic that you would have access to another, an M4 or something like that. But I think having that versatility is not something to discard for sure.
Great point.
All right. So this is interesting. He's talking about this gentleman said he went through sniper selection 2007, and he didn't have the SAS, the semi-automatic sniper system, and he moved with M24s, which is Remington 700 bolt action, in a drag bag and carried the M4s. Brought the M24 out once they got in position. Yeah, I mean, basically that's been sniper doctrine up until we started pushing a lot more semi-automatics into the battlefield. Let's see. Scar with LPVO, versatile combination, is very tempting. But if expecting both counter sniping and potential room clearing, he'll live with the extra gear for to sustain the AI and MP5. The Scar, again, while tempting, has its because of the advantages, which to go with a single weapon is a bad compromise in both directions. CQB, it's limited. It's difficult to control with limited capacity. Let's see, switching weapons. Yeah, we're not talking about switching weapons when you're. I mean, I think it's unrealistic. I mean, I hope the audience knows that we're not doing a 360 no scope op kill on some insurgents in the middle of the freaking in the freaking room if it comes to it. Like, you're not jumping off of a 1-story building to zip someone from behind. I mean, we're not switching weapons. I mean, that's just not really doctrinal what you do. Maybe a sidearm if you absolutely need to drop to it, but it would be unrealistic to, especially a bolt gun. I mean, can you imagine running around the room with a damn bolt gun in your hand? A suppressed AI.
I do think it's worth mentioning here, though, that while obviously the MP5 will have an advantage in room-to-room clearing, like physical room clearing, that when we start getting outside of that 10-foot range and we get into the 10, 15, 20, 25 yards, or then 25 yards to 100 yards or meters, for depending on how you want to whatever measurement you want to use. When we start to get into that range, or even call it 25 to 200, I think that you're going to see the advantage in this particular scenario shift significantly toward the Scar. It is a light enough platform as kitted that it allows you to be very fast and use it very similar to a carbine as opposed to, say, a battle rifle setup. And we've demoed that as well. Like, it's not as easy as using an AR, and it's not as easy as using a subgun or a PCC of some sort. But it's definitely not like using a heavy kitted quad-railed FAL, for example. It's a different feel. I find that I can run it exceptionally quick in those 10 to 100 or 150 yard engagements. I think it's very reasonable to suggest that doing so is possible. Again, reference back to Weston's point about the feasibility of it standing and fighting in an engagement in that particular scenario. But I can still see it being more useful in like a displacing and engaging to gain and buy yourself some time and space than an MP5 would be. Thoughts?
I think we've got to... No, I agree with you on that, but we've got to also think back at the pre-2010 timeframe. I mean, Weston, you guys were running M14 derivatives out in Iraq, correct? I mean, it is a huge difference going between a SCAR and M14 derivative.
Yep. Oh, for sure.
M14's like, even on the Mark 14s, you're still slower on running it. It's a pig running a Mark 14. I mean, that's not even an M21. M21's even worse. It's got the length to go with the weight. So the SCAR back then, I mean, the AR-10 systems definitely overtook it. The SR-25 systems definitely overtook the SCAR in that battle. But the SCAR in its initial development, it did have a shock value to everybody, because how did you turn something so light to run a 7.6251 and able to push that type of accuracy and use that type of optic interchangeability? I mean, those are pretty good features to a weapon system of that era. What people did not know is, I mean, because it was a scaled up SCAR Lite, that's when it ran into a lot of those harmonics issues, and it would shake itself loose. And we didn't know that until a couple of years down the road with using it. So as far as the system itself, if it's well maintained, it's pretty awesome system for that era.
Oh, most definitely. Very versatile, just like Josh was saying. I mean, it brought a versatility to a 762 platform that didn't really exist in that time.
All right, so the next comment. All right, so whether we're stationary or not, I think this is something that you guys kind of touched upon earlier, because 72 hours is a long time frame on a JSOC operation to not have any variables pop up. So, but at the same time, what's the probability of those variables pushing you to clear rooms? I don't know. I mean, this is really hypothetical. How much do you trust the situation? I guess it's a. I think this is more so a trust. How much you trust that variables won't just explode, and you've got a Black Hawk fall out of the sky.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and it's hard. We had to make some assumptions here. I think. Since we're looking back and we don't really have like intel report or anything like that, because there is a lot of going to be a lot of friendly forces activity in the area. I think the probability is lower that you'll be enemy forces will be able to mass and gather and maneuver on you, but it's still definitely a potential, especially if your position is compromised and they know it's a small team or a singleton out there. Their ability to mass 3 or 4 or 5 of their buddies and move to your location is still definitely a very real possibility, even with all the friendly forces around. And you're probably considered maybe 15 to 30 minutes from having QRF, but it doesn't take that long when you're outnumbered and fixed.
Hey, Weston, were there Blue Force trackers back then?
Yes.
How was it? I mean, how mature was the system back then? Blue Force tracker is an Army system. Basically, it's like a GPS with friendly forces and terrain already driven on it or drawn on it. And it's like, I mean, it's 2010, so it's not like good, nice Google Maps or something like that, but it's an Army system that is GPS and shows where friendly forces and potential enemy forces are, and you could poke at the thing and show enemy forces. How mature was that system back then?
Yeah, I'd say it was fairly mature. It had most of the features that are currently in existence for the BFT.
So I mean, it wouldn't be as bad as 91 Gothic Serpent, Black Hawks falling out of the sky, to where you just have no idea what anyone is and you have some dingling circling the sky.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And I mean, you're doing a high level HVT interdiction. The assumption is that you would have, some air cover of some sort, whether it's fixed wing or UAS or whatever. So there's someone somewhere tracking all the friendly forces during an op like this for sure.
I just thought this was interesting because this guy whose uncle was an Army sharpshooter in East Timor said he didn't like lugging 2 weapons for 5 straight months. I agree. I mean, this is horrible, but we're not talking about a 5-month 5-month op. I mean, I agree. If two primaries for 5 months is too much. Let's see. Oh, this plays into what Josh is talking about. Without the spotter to observe the bullet's impact and target movement, cycling the bolt will only be slowed, and you'll be forced into doing quick math in an urban setting with lots of hiding spots and covers that justify the usage of rapid follow-up shots. This is exactly what Josh is talking about. The fact that you have a rapid follow-up shot to observe your own hits is a massive strength. However, that also gets detracted with the fact that you have no suppressor on it. I think that is one of the biggest scary points of running that type of system.
I do think it's really relevant. I mean, I know obviously it's harder for people to really see it from our videos because they're not actually watching through the sighting system that the weapon is being discharged through. But seeing where the impact is taking place through that sighting system and then making a snap correction is, at least when it comes down to competition shooting and shooting, 3-gun style stuff out at distance, that's 100% what I would be doing. I'd be watching the impact and seeing exactly where the round hits based off of my best known assessment of where the round should hit, and then making a snap correction in the reticle without coming off the reticle at all. Basically the second, the absolute fraction of a second that I see the impact, and making that snap correction. And that is something that you lose when you run a bolt gun. Even somebody who's running a bolt really fast, you're still having to, at least in some way, shape, or form, come momentarily off the target. It doesn't, obviously you guys are very good at staying right on the reticle, maintaining a cheek weld and running the bolt, but it's still not as fast in that exact circumstance as the semi-auto, the gas gun.
Yeah, especially, I mean, if you assume whether going from 308 all the way up to 338, I mean, that's going to be another consideration, even suppress, especially, I mean, if you're running 338, I mean, that's kind of excessive for like 200 meters, but I mean, it's not about that. It's about covering how much ground you could cover. But that's if you haven't tried it, I mean, it is difficult to come back on target if you fire a large caliber like that.
Especially when you add the increased magnification that we're talking about being a big advantage for PID, it obviously then detracts from your ability to take a quick follow-up shot, which is why, again, I come at this from a competition perspective because that's where my experience comes from. But the PRS shooters, they all run huge magnification ranges on their optics, usually 5 to 25 or like the 7 to 30s. But it's very rare that they will be dialed up all the way for their shots. It's much more likely that they're dialed down to 15, 18 power at maximum so that they can track the reticle. And that's on a system that doesn't have a lot of recoil, like the 6mm calibers that are really just like laser beams and don't have a lot of recoil on them, but they're still dialing it back in order to be able to stay as close to on target as possible through the reticle and while they're running the bolt.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Josh is saying. So that's one of the other things that makes this scenario so interesting, and it's a really difficult choice too, because you're looking at two separate mission sets essentially. So one is counter sniper against Juba. The other is Overwatch of friendly forces. So when you're talking about follow-up shots and providing overwatch, if there's some other friendly forces in the area that say get ambushed or whatever, or you see a group of IED placers or something like that, you have to consider for the overwatch portion, you may be better off with the SCAR. However, for the counter sniper portion, you may be better off with the bolt gun for that single shot engagement, or for if you're just going to more than likely PID and then call in friendly forces to cordon the area and then move in from there. So I think that's a great point of like, are you looking at imminent threat and hostile intent, or are you looking for a PID of an individual? And this scenario presents both questions.
All right, we're running low on time, but I wanted to show this last one because a little disappointed that the JDAM was not an option. MET-TC. The C stands for civilian considerations. I've never called a JDAM in. Have you called a JDAM in, Weston?
I've called somewhere close to 30 airstrikes from fixed wing, and then several dozen indirect fire missions as well. So this is an interesting one. Let me take this one. So this is good. So I actually used to have a JTAC who had a philosophy that no matter what the problem was, fires were the answer, and you can fix anything with fires. And so I would assume that a JTAC may have written this comment. But when you're talking about JDAM, I mean, being able to clear CDE or civilian damage estimate or whatever it's called from a JDAM in an urban area, very unlikely that you'll be able to do that because of how many buildings surround other buildings, even if you get a target locked down to a single building. It can be done, but especially at this time, it was very unlikely to get a strike like that approved. More realistic would probably be a Hellfire engagement from either UAS or from rotary wing. That's a more realistic engagement of a single individual in an urban area that's been PID'd. So I think they have a good point with using fires to interdict the individual, but they're discounting that you would have to PID that individual and the location, regardless of whether you're going to cordon and clear, engage with your own primary weapon system, or call in an airstrike. So they kind of skirted the question, and I think JDAMing without taking into account the actual scenario doesn't really solve the problem.
So, what would the clearance process be like if you called for a JDAM on a civilian structure in Baghdad?
Well, so I can't really speak to specifics at that time because it's been a while, but I would assume at that time that clearance for a JDAM strike in an urban area was probably at least at the 1-star level, potentially the 2 or 3-star level, especially considering that you're basically in that, it's a semi-green zone between BIOP and the green zone. So the idea that you would JDAM an entire city block in that zone where friendly forces are driving constantly all day, every day, and potentially piss off 3 times as many people, create more enemies than the one person that you killed. You just created a larger problem for yourself and your friendly forces, and you did not meet the intent, which was to reduce the threat to friendly forces. You actually increased the threat to friendly forces if you create civilian damage and blow up a bunch of buildings and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. So at that moment, or at this point, I think this is a good point to open the floor up to the next part.
Yeah, let's do it. Questions, comments?
Stand by.
The viewers.
Рут влево. Есть догорание 2 крайних светодиодов. В центре не горят. Нейтраль погасла. Выдаю. Рут на торможение. Нейтраль погасла.
All right. Okay. So let's check it out. And if you guys see any comments, let me know because I can pull the comments up right here. Everybody, it is open on the floor.
I was a big fan. This was a while back. I was a big fan of the option C, bring the Deagle.
Yeah. Gold plated, of course.
Yeah, of course.
What if the AI was in some other caliber? Would that make you change your mind, Josh?
It would definitely be a consideration. Like if we're shooting like 338 out of it, where I'm drastically increasing my capability over, a 308 versus a 308 in a slightly less accurate platform, it would definitely improve the capability. But I think it still goes back to what Weston alluded to, which is that it's almost like you're hedging your bet for the one half of the mission set with the selection of the SCAR versus hedging your bet toward the other half with the AI system. So, intrinsically, I still feel like I would again, it comes down to the variables of the situation. Like, how does the actual scenario unfold becomes a huge question that remains the finite piece of whether or not it's the right choice or not.
So obviously, it doesn't help with the. I mean, running a bolt gun is running a bolt gun is running a bolt gun. It's not. You're not going to get fast follow-up shots.
Right.
That's the point. I mean, you're increasing your distance. You're increasing your potentially. If you're shooting through vehicles, you could punch.
Yeah, I'm
through
assuming
more stuff.
penetration, ability to buck the wind. If I'm shooting a magnum caliber, I'm assuming that my wind calls are going to be less specific and not as if I'm shooting 308 at 700 and I make a bad wind call by 2 miles an hour, that's off target. If I make that same call with a 338, it may be on target. It's questionable. It may be on target, but so that's kind of where I'm getting to.
Okay, so let's take away from the AI caliber. What if instead of an MP5, you have an MP7? Weston doesn't like this.
For me, that wouldn't change.
Just like what your last point was. A bolt gun is a bolt gun. It's a bolt gun. A subgun is a subgun. Is a subgun also.
Oh, sorry, I accidentally stopped my camera. I brought that up because we're doing a lot of PDW work right now. But anyways, let's see. Do you guys see any?
The one from Tony. See the one from Tony that's in there. That is that's worthwhile. I think we've hit on it a little bit, but
I'm looking for it.
Well, the question is, if the mission parameters changed and you had to perform a hard exfil from a hostile force, how does that impact your decision? Does it change your decision? And for me, I think mine is probably already tailored towards this answer. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I can jump on this one. So yeah, that's a really good point. And I think I tried to allude to that earlier. That I think that would definitely sway into wanting to have a gas gun as a primary weapon system. However, going back to Matt TC depending on where troops are, where friendly troops are, how long you're going to have to E&E or move to exfil, how long you may have to stand and fight. I think all of that will still come into play. So if you're in direct overwatch of friendly forces and they're 100 yards in front of you, that's a different calculus than if you're in a hide site alone and unafraid and 15 to 20 minutes away. And then also with METTC, you have to consider the enemy. So what is the enemy doing? What is their response time? What is their strength? How fast can they gather their forces and maneuver? All that stuff. Even what is the enemy TTPs? Are they super aggressive, or are they going to back off if you drop a couple clips of MP5 their direction? Or is that going to slow them down enough, or are they hardcore? They're going to keep pushing through. And then the remainder, I think, is really interesting in the comment section, which is the remainder of the kit you would load out. So I think that also will come in, and you could throw out a lot of different scenarios that would sway heavier towards the SCAR, heavier towards the AI, based on what else you're taking. If you're taking a Claymore to block the back entrance to your hide site, that buys you a lot more time and firepower than a frag grenade. Stuff like that, I think, could definitely influence your decision also, but wasn't really part of the exercise.
Yeah. Henry, as you're searching for one that's just popped up that I noticed from Grayson was, specific for Weston.
That's exactly the
perfect.
one.
Yeah, good.
That's exactly the one I was hovering over. Weston, Mr. Snyder has a question for you. How many shot opportunities would you have in this type of scenario before the target bugs out, if not killed?
That is a really good question. It could vary. I mean, it could be zero, depending on what your engagement criteria is and your rules of engagement. So if you're not able to get a 100% PID on this guy through multiple systems of verification of who it is, your odds of being able to interdict him and getting cleared to interdict are pretty low, probably, unless he displays hostile intent or hostile act. So could be zero, could be a single shot. I think probably with this particular individual, you're looking at one and maybe a follow-up shot, just based on how long he's survived in this role, doing what he's doing, having people go after him, having people look for him for, potentially years, and he's still alive, still doing it, still operating. So the idea that he's going to do something stupid and reveal himself very easily and not have an exfil plan, not have a plan to get out of there and not allow someone to get follow-up shots on him, I think the odds of that are probably pretty low. So to answer the question more directly, I would say maybe one and a follow-up shot.
Makes sense. Yeah, there was a question that came in from Mason Henry about how 8 power maximums.
Is it underneath this one?
Oh, it might be. Sorry, I didn't see you already threw a new one up. Go for it.
So this one is Mr. Ament was saying that if he were CIA, that he'd already be in civvies in a civvy vehicle, boogieing out 60 seconds after taking the shot. I mean...
Well, to Weston's point, like that's, if you're going to engage from a position alone, I'm assuming even if, whether or not you're leaving all your kit and you're walking out like nothing happened versus you're making movement rapidly, like, either way, you're making movement in this scenario, right? Like none of us are sitting there after we've engaged and just being like, I hope nobody shows up.
I mean, I think also, I mean, there's been an assumption in the comments portion that anyone from the CIA Special Operations Group just rolls around in Mercedes and freaking like Warzone. I mean, maybe some of them do, but they're not. I mean, this isn't Western Europe, man. I mean, I don't know. I never worked with the agency over in Iraq, but this isn't Western Europe, is what I mean, they're not dumb too.
And I think there's several things, especially when you're looking at this from a terrain perspective. It also depends on where your hide site selection is. So your hide site selection, if it's located in proximity to people who can identify where the shot came from, then yes, you will be displacing as quickly as possible, more than likely. But along this route, there may be locations where you can get significant standoff from any population areas, possibly in a sand dune, possibly in a wadi somewhere, something like that, where people won't be able to pinpoint where the shot came from, and you'd actually be safer remaining in place, waiting for exfil to come pick you up. So I think one size fits all on something like this is probably, I mean, and in that scenario, you wouldn't be better off in civilian clothes. You'd be better off in a hide site and camouflage than you would be wearing,
right,
like a headdress or something, right? You might have that in your bag if that's part of your exfil plan, but there's not really a one size fits all for this. It really is dependent on how you work it out in your mind, which is what we're looking at by doing this kind of mental exercise of like all the considerations that you might have to think about.
So this one also actually goes on. This is a good follow up for that. Again, for Weston, mentioned some terrain variability in the AO based on your choice. What would be the ideal hide in this AO? What would that be? Yeah,
this is one of those areas that's kind of getting into TTPs that I don't really want to push too far on. Just, I think safe to say, the one that allows you the best place to make a safe displacement, the one that gives you the least probability of being discovered or being given up. So I don't want to get too deep into TDPs on how sniper teams and small kill teams in place themselves and infiltrate.
It's all right. We don't need to go too far into that. Josh, which one were you talking about?
Well, there was a question from Mason, just reference whether or not 8 power would be enough. And it was in there, and it's nothing.
Sorry, this is the wrong one. This is the wrong.
That's okay. We don't even necessarily need to pull it up, but the crux of the question is 8 power enough? It may be enough for you to engage targets on the flat range. Is it really enough to engage them on extended ranges? Yeah, precisely. I think a lot of this, and again, I'm going to defer, Weston, to you on real life application and implementation, but so much of the magnification, in my estimation, comes down to PID and not necessarily into being able to take the accurate shot. Yes, obviously, like more magnification gives you better ability to refine your point of aim. But if we were to say we had a spotting device or some sort of observer glass with us, theoretically, in my mind, that sort of counteracts the detriments of a lower top end magnification optic, because I really don't see a 10 power or a 12 power being all that differential to an 8 power when it comes down to PID. Like if I'm really needing to PID at those ranges beyond 500 meters, like I want a freaking telescope staring at this person.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And this kind of gets back to my previous point, which is the rest of your kit loadout has so much of an impact on which weapon system you would choose. So I think you're absolutely right on that front. And I think your points about engagement distances are spot on. And I think the difference between an 8 and a 10 power, and it really even a bolt gun and a SCAR for this purposes in good scenarios, it would be negligible the ranges that you would be able to accurately engage a target in. Unless you have specific intel of like he's going to be in this specific small window on a building or something like that, then you would probably want, you'd know it'd be a single shot. You'd want a bolt gun for that scenario with the most accuracy. But I think for this, for the purposes of here, I think that's spot on.
All right, we have about a couple minutes left. I've actually found one that let's see. It's another question for you, Weston. It's basically he was asking about locating a suppressed sniper during counter sniper operations. Here we go. It's basically a simple question. How would you locate a sniper using a suppressor during a counter sniper operation, or if you're being sniped at? I mean, what would?
Okay.
Again, TTPs aside, you know the drill.
Sure. So that is, snipers are really one of the most difficult things that you can encounter on a battlefield, especially a good one. The most effective way to run counter sniper, if you have trained counter snipers, is to utilize them in conjunction with some other forces. Barring that, the best way to do it is actually to do a large operation. So that requires a lot of moving pieces. You have to be able to cover a lot of ground, and you have to have relative surety that individual will be in the target area that you're searching, whether it's a few city blocks or potentially even larger than that, which requires a lot of troops to be able to cordon off, block everything off, and trap them inside. And even then, if they're trained, they're going to have some pretty good hiding spots and all that stuff. So it's very difficult, and it really does. That's why this exercise is really interesting, because it is a specific effort to be able to go after a trained sniper like this. So I think sometimes you get lucky. But I mean, you look at even here in America, if you look at somebody like the DC sniper and how long it took to find them, and then you compound that on you're operating in unfriendly terrain, maybe unfriendly people, friendly people, but they're not trying to help you. Here in America, everyone was trying to look for them, and it still took them forever. So it is very difficult. I think that's a really really good question.
Just for those who are asking in the comments section about what we mean by PID, guys, positive identification, or to the best of the ability of the person making the call.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. So, gentlemen, we are nearing the end of our transmission. I wanted to basically open the floor to you two. Is there anything that you guys really wanted to, anything else you wanted to bring out towards this to tie it up? Otherwise, I'm just going to go towards the announcements and talk about the next Pick One exercise with our next special guest. So the floor is open to you two. Go ahead.
Pelvic inflammatory disease. That's good. Okay. Nothing to follow up here. Really appreciate you having me on. Hopefully I can get on another one with you guys soon. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, really appreciate you bringing the real world experience to the show on this one. Definitely think we got some very interesting questions for Weston specifically that somebody's able to answer, somebody's not able to answer, but you know.
All right. So yes, huge thanks again to Weston. I know. I mean, you're in the SCAR video. I held onto your hunting rifle for like what, 9 months. It still works. It's not rusted, so I did clean it. So at this point, I'd like to thank everyone for joining. One thing before we go, and we'll make a point to show everybody before we go, the next Pick One that we are going to work on is going to go towards the colder climates in Finland. And your options for this one will be during World War II, late World War II, the Finnish M39 Mosin Nagant or the German Kar 98K with a ZF41 scope. And we actually are featuring a special guest. I don't know if you could see this lovely gentleman. Will be joining us, Mr. Ian McCollum from Forgotten Weapons will be our VIP for this one. And yeah, I'm not sure, Josh. We still have to talk about when we're going to push the Pick One out, but that's going to be the next one. And we're doing it during the colder months around this time frame.
Yep, absolutely. So keep your eyes out. Obviously, the regular content, guys, is going to keep rolling as best as we can get it done. And yeah, we certainly appreciate you all tuning into the episode.
All right. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Weston, once again, thank you for being a part of this. I think everyone, according to the comments section, really enjoyed your insight into a lot of this, the considerations towards this op. So without anything further,
see you in the next one, guys.
Be safe.
Take care.
716, this is Jill 96, 4 Vic, 8 packs, red con 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Jill 96, this is 716, roger, over. 16, Jill 91, 1 pack,